So, Paul, during your time as chairman, George Best was awarded the Football Writers Association Tribute Award. It was 32 years after his Footballer of the Year award. Why was George chosen that year for the tribute?
Um, I think people have been really worried about George. Everybody knew that his the problems that he had with alcohol, and people had shied away. I'd been on the committee of the Football Writers Association, I guess, probably from the early to mid '90s, and we'd always thought about him for the tribute award, and had always shied away because of the fear that he might not be up to it in terms of his inability to stay away from a drink, quite frankly. And we thought it's a black tie event at the Savoy. It's a hugely prestigious event in our calendar, and we really didn't want to run any risks. But I thought, well, I took over as the chairman, I think, in 99, 2000, and we were going into a new millennium, and I just thought we should just grasp the nettle. That probably in the top three greatest players that these islands have ever produced. Why wouldn't we celebrate him? We, I have to say, that decision looked a little bit dubious in the November. We had the tribute dinner in January, and it looked very dubious in November, because George was a guest speaker at one of our awards in the Northern Managers Football Awards. And he turned up as drunk as a skunk and stood up to do his speech. And it became very, very clear that he wasn't capable of doing a speech or his after-dinner act. So he was hurriedly bundled away. I called an emergency committee meeting in my hotel room at the hotel, and we panicked, I have to say, and it was very difficult then. We couldn't withdraw it without looking small-minded. So we had to go into the most elaborate of preparations. We had, during the dinner at the Savoy, we had people speaking like Dennis Law, Michael Parkinson. Joe Lovejoy had written a book on George, and George himself. And it was Paddy Crerand, I think, if memory serves me right. But it was dry. The table was dry. The top table was absolutely dry, and George kept asking for a drink, and I kept grabbing the waiter's arm every time he went to pour him a glass of wine. Basically, until all the formalities were over and George had done his speech, and he went down an absolute storm. I have to say, Michael Parkinson interviewed him on stage, and all the other guests came up, and it worked out absolutely brilliantly. But I have to say, I suspect it was one of the most nervous nights of my life, hoping that it would go well. In the end, as soon as he finished, we thought, okay, so we gave him a bottle of Chablis. He, Michael Parkinson, his wife at the time, disappeared off, and the rest of the people just enjoyed the rest of the night. But it was very, very touch and go.
George is still the youngest man to have won the Footballer of the Year award. What made him so special, so young?
I mean, I didn't have the privilege of watching him live, but I've seen probably every ounce of footage that there exists of him. He was just a phenomenal player, phenomenal talent. I don't know what, just genius, really. I mean, I know it's the word used about him many, many, many times, but he was a genius. He could just destroy teams on his own. You go back to the 1968 European Cup final and the build-up, semi-final and the final. He was just unplayable. And in that team with Bobby Charlton, excuse me, with Dennis Law, with Brian Kidd, very young Brian Kidd at the time, and that great Manchester United team that had been rebuilt by Sir Matt Busby, he was absolutely at the centre of it. I mean, you couldn't argue that if you were to say to me, George Best is the greatest player these islands have ever produced, I couldn't argue. I wouldn't argue. I don't think there's too many people who would argue.